All right, everyone, get ready for a deep dive. Today we're tackling 9/11. I mean, we all know it, but how many of us really know the whole story behind it?
It's kind of taken for granted, isn't it?
Totally. So we're using this true crime podcast episode as our jumping off point.
Oh, interesting.
And it all goes back to this really tragic case, the murder of Kitty Genovese in 1964.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, and it's not just about the crime itself. Like, that's horrible enough, but this case kind of snowballed into this huge thing that actually ended up being the push for creating the 9/11 system we have today. Wild, right?
It really shows you how one event can have these ripple effects, changing how we do things, even on a really big scale.
Totally. Okay, so get this. It's 3 a.m. in Queens, New York. Back in 1964, Kitty Genovese, she's 29 years old, just finished her shift managing a bar.
Late night.
And here's the thing. It was her 1-year anniversary with her partner, Mary Ann. Like, imagine that, just a normal night turning into a total nightmare.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that adds another layer to it, like the ordinary life, and then bam, this awful thing.
Chilling, right? So she's walking to her apartment, and she notices this guy, following her.
Oh, no.
She tries to run, but he catches up to her and stabs her. Twice. In the back.
That's terrifying.
And it wasn't some deserted street or anything. This was a pretty populated area.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah, and Kitty screams for help. Some people even said her screams woke up people, in the buildings nearby, on either side of the street.
Wow. So people heard?
Right. And get this, one neighbor even yelled out their window at the guy. It scared him off for a little while.
So at least someone did something.
Yeah, but here's where it gets even more disturbing. Kitty, she's badly hurt, tries to get to her building, but she collapses in the entryway. And the attacker, he comes back. 10 minutes later.
He came back.
Yeah. And those 10 minutes, what was going on during those 10 minutes? That's what really becomes central to the whole story.
Right. What did people do or not do during that time?
Exactly. So the guy, he comes back, stabs Kitty again, sexually assaults her, and then steals $49 from her wallet before taking off.
Oh, my God.
It wasn't until another tenant in the building, a woman named Sophia, hears everything going on, finds Kitty, and yells for someone to call the police, that anyone actually does.
Finally.
Yeah. It was 4 a.m. by then. Help finally arrives. But
yeah.
Kitty dies on the way to the hospital.
That's so awful. But it's not just the brutality of it, right? It's the question of who saw it happen, who heard something, and why didn't they act sooner?
It's almost like this perfect storm, It becomes about way more than just this one crime.
Yeah.
It brings up all these anxieties we have about, city life and how we're supposed to take care of each other.
Right.
And you won't believe what happened next.
So after Kitty's murder, things got even crazier. The police, they actually started focusing on Kitty's partner, Mary Ann. They questioned her for hours about their relationship.
I mean, it was the 60s, but even so, that whole line of questioning, it's just, so invasive. And not to mention, fueled by prejudice.
Oh, absolutely. It's pretty messed up. But luckily, things shifted. A week later, a man named Winston Moseley, he gets arrested for burglary. And guess what? His car, it matched the descriptions from witnesses in Kitty's case. Plus, he had cuts on his hands.
Busted.
Pretty much. So when they confronted him, he confessed. And not just to Kitty's murder, he admitted to other murders too. And rapes, burglaries, a whole string of horrifying stuff.
Whoa, this guy sounds like a serial criminal.
He was. And here's the really creepy part. Moseley, he was living this double life.
Yeah.
To everyone else, he was just a regular family man.
Well, it's scary. You never know, right?
Exactly. He actually told the police that he left his house that night with a hunting knife and he was looking for someone to kill.
Man, that sends shivers down my spine. It's like something out of a movie, but way worse because it actually happened.
It really makes you question what you think you know about people. But anyway, so Moseley's capture, it did bring some justice, but it also showed this huge problem back then. There was no good way to call for help.
Right, no 911?
Nope. Imagine, if you were in trouble in 1964, you couldn't just dial 3 numbers. You had to know the direct number for the police station in your area. And even then, who knows if anyone would even answer, let alone show up quickly.
Yeah, that's a terrifying thought, flipping through a phone book in a panic while something awful is happening.
It was a total mess, nothing like the system we have today. Which actually brings us to a turning point, how 911 actually came to be. So 10 days after Kitty's murder, the police commissioner was talking to a New York Times editor. And he made a comment that changed everything. He said the most shocking part wasn't the murder itself.
What was it then?
He said it was the fact that there were, get this, 38 witnesses.
38.
Yep, and not a single one called the police.
Oh my gosh.
And that's when everything exploded. The media went nuts. The story, it just fed into all these fears people had about living in cities, about safety, about losing that sense of community. I mean, think about it. 38 people just watching this woman get murdered and doing nothing.
It's just awful.
Right. And that's how this whole idea of the bystander effect got started. Basically, the more people are around, the less likely anyone is to help because everyone thinks someone else will do it.
We've all been there, right? Like
Yeah.
seeing something weird and thinking, oh, someone else probably already called 911.
Exactly. So the New York Times, they put this huge story on the front page titled, get this, 38 witnesses. They talked about how all these respectable citizens did nothing while this was happening. And it was like, boom, everyone in the country was talking about it.
It makes sense. It's such a powerful, like, disturbing image.
It really is. And it kind of makes sense, right? Like when you're in a crowd, you don't feel as personally responsible.
Right, like it's spread out.
Yep. But there's a twist. Turns out the original story, it wasn't totally accurate. Later, people found out that it wasn't actually 38 people who saw enough to realize Kitty was in danger. It was way fewer. And some people said they did call the police, but the police took forever or just didn't handle it right.
So the real story was more complicated.
Way more complicated, but you can't deny the impact it had. This idea of 38 witnesses, even if it wasn't completely true, it made everyone demand a better system for emergencies.
I mean, how could they not?
Right. People were outraged, and it all came together with these new technologies that were popping up, and well, that's how 911 was born.
That's amazing.
The very first 911 call, get this, it was made just 4 years later in 1968 in Haleyville, Alabama.
Wow. And by 2017, 911 was handling like over 240 million calls a year. That's insane.
I know. It's incredible how something so awful could lead to something so important. But the story doesn't end there. 911, it's kept changing over the years, adapting to new tech and how our communities need it.
Well, yeah, it's not like we're all using rotary phones anymore.
Exactly. Think about it. We've gone from just talking to a dispatcher to having our location tracked with landlines. That's a huge deal for emergency responders. Even if someone can't talk, they can still find them.
That makes sense. But here's a question I have. This precise location tracking, it doesn't work the same way with cell phones, right?
You got it. That's a good point.
It seems kind of weird, like with everything being so high-tech these days. Why wouldn't it be the same?
Well, think about it. With a landline, your location, it's fixed, right? It's always the same. But with cell phones, your location, it's tracked through signals from these cell towers. So they can get a general area, but it's not always exact, especially if you're inside or the signal's bad.
So it's not as foolproof as we might think.
Right. So if you ever need to call 911 from your cell phone, make sure you give them your exact address and any nearby landmarks, just in case.
Got it. Don't assume they automatically know where you are.
Exactly. And speaking of how technology is changing things, what about texting to 911?
Oh yeah, texting 911, that seems like a big deal.
It is. Think about, like, someone in a dangerous situation where they can't talk. Like if someone breaks into their house or they're trying to escape domestic violence, texting 911 can literally be a lifeline.
Wow, I hadn't thought about that. So it's not just for people who can't talk because of, like, a medical condition. It's also for situations where it's dangerous to talk.
Exactly. It's all about having more ways for people to get help when they need it most.
It's really cool how 911's become so much more accessible. It's not just about voice calls anymore. It's about giving people options.
Mm-hmm.
But even with all these changes, we got to remember that 911, it's all about people helping people, right?
100%. Behind every single call, there's a real person going through something scary or difficult. And on the other side, there's a whole team of people working hard to help. So yeah, tech is super important, but at the end of the day, it's people who make the system work. And it's people who can stop emergencies from happening in the first place or step in when they see someone who needs help.
And that brings us back to the whole bystander effect thing. Knowing what we know now about what really happened with Kitty Genovese, does that bystander effect still make sense? Is it real, or was it just a big misunderstanding in this one case?
Well, researchers, they've been trying to figure that out for ages. It's a tough one.
Yeah.
I mean, that whole 38 witnesses thing, not totally accurate, but the case definitely got people thinking, like, why didn't anyone do anything? So they started doing all this research on how people act in these situations, when someone needs help.
So what did they find out?
Well, the bystander effect, it's definitely real.
Really?
But it's not as simple as everyone just being, like, heartless and not caring. you know?
Okay, so it's more complicated than that.
Way more. Okay, picture this. You're walking down the street, right? Crowded street. And someone trips and falls. If you're the only one there, you're probably going to stop and help, right?
Yeah, most likely.
But what if you're surrounded by people? You might hesitate, like, oh, someone else will help them. That's basically what the bystander effect is. It's like we spread the responsibility around to everyone so no one feels like it's all on them.
I guess that makes sense. It's like, oh, someone else already called 911 or something.
Exactly. And sometimes it's just not clear if it's really an emergency, you know, like is that person just messing around or are they really hurt?
Yeah, you don't want to overreact.
Right. Plus, sometimes people are just straight up scared to get involved, you know? Like, what if I make things worse? What if I get in trouble?
Yeah, I get that.
So, yeah, sometimes people freeze up because they're afraid or unsure, not because they don't care. And of course, everyone's different, right? Some people are just naturally more helpful than others.
So it's not just one thing. It's a whole mix of stuff going on.
Yeah.
But here's what I'm wondering. If we know about the bystander effect, can we, do something about it?
That's the good news. Yes, we can. Just knowing about it can make a difference. Like, if you're aware of it, you're more likely to catch yourself when you start thinking, oh, someone else will handle this.
So that's like shining a spotlight on our own thoughts, huh?
Exactly. And we can also try to encourage each other to be more helpful. You know, like, be the person who sets a good example.
Be the one who steps up.
Yep. Think about it. If you see someone else helping, you're more likely to help too. It's contagious.
We can break the cycle. I like that.
And here's something else. Did you know there are actually trainings you can take to learn how to be a better bystander?
Really? Like how to help someone safely and stuff.
Yep. They teach you how to figure out what's going on, how to stay safe, and how to actually take action instead of just freezing up.
Wow. I didn't know that.
So yeah, we're not powerless. We can all learn how to be the person who makes a difference, not the one who stands by and does nothing.
That's really empowering. Man, we've covered a lot today. From Kitty Genovese's murder in '64 to how 9/11 was created to the bystander effect and even how technology is changing how we respond to emergencies.
It's been quite a journey, right?
Totally. I think the biggest takeaway for me is that one event, even a terrible one, can change the world. And that all of us, we have a role to play in helping each other.
I think that's a great point to end on.
So next time you hear sirens or see someone who needs help, remember Kitty's story. Think about what you would want someone to do if you were in that situation. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be the one who makes a difference. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.